Tigers' road trip got off to a disastrous start. The team left their cleats on campus, but Lee was able to send word back to the school, and the shoes were delivered on a later train. Sewanee arrived in Austin, Texas on November 8th, 1899, ready to take on the Texas Longhorns the very next afternoon. The Sewanee Purple and other publications reported that the Longhorn players actually welcomed the Tigers off the train and personally escorted the Tigers to their hotel room. So it was a very, very friendly atmosphere, none hostile here. The Longhorns were undefeated, 3-0, and were looking to snap Sewanee's streak. Sewanee, of course, was 4-0 after their wins over Georgia, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, and Southwestern Presbyterian, who we of course now know as Rhodes. In front of a crowd of 2,500 people, pretty sizable crowd for the day, by the way, the Tigers got to work. Diddy Seibels ran in the first touchdown within the opening 5 minutes and then scored again with 1 minute left in the half. All of this while bleeding from a cut that he got over his right eye just a few minutes in the game. And by the end of the game, he was drenched in blood. The New Orleans Times-Picayune reported that the game was, and I quote, the liveliest battle ever witnessed in the city of Austin, Texas. I think some fans of the Mac Brown era Longhorns are probably going to dispute this liveliest battle ever claim. But at the time, the Longhorns, much like every other team in college football not from the Northeast, were still relatively young. They also were at a disadvantage because of their location. They were significantly farther west as compared to other big powerhouse programs, and even just programs in the SIAA, the conference that they shared with Sewanee, Georgia, Georgia Tech. So it was very hard for teams to get out, and when they did, they weren't very well rested. So lively games were kind of hard to come by in Austin. Now, Seibel scored 2 touchdowns in this game, as I mentioned, and those were all the Tigers needed to win as they battled their way to a 12-0 victory. Less than 24 hours after their game against Texas, the Tigers took on Texas A&M at Harold Park in Houston. Harold Park was at the time the home to the Houston Buffaloes baseball team. The Buffaloes were a minor league affiliate to the St. Louis Cardinals until 1958, when they switched their affiliation to, interestingly enough, Cardinal rival Chicago Cubs. Now, the team would eventually be bought by the Houston Sports Association in 1961. When this happened, the Buffaloes were renamed to the Colt 45s and moved to Colt Stadium. Then, they were famously renamed the Astros upon their move to the Astrodome in 1965. And the rest, as they say, is history. The game against Sewanee was the first time A&M had faced an out-of-state opponent. While Bill Claiborne reportedly used his swollen eye that he had sustained in the game against Texas to intimidate the Aggie players, telling them, "See this? I lost it yesterday in Austin. This afternoon, I'm getting a new one." And these are, this football team, Texas A&M, as it famously is today, a primarily military school. While not everybody who goes to A&M nowadays goes into the military, back then it was specifically a core school, and famously now, if you want to join the Fighting Texas Aggie Marching Band, you do have to be a member of the Corps of Cadets. So these are military men, strong guys, prepared to go fight in a war, training to go fight in a war. And while Bill Claiborne, as wild as ever, was going out and making these guys shiver in their pants. The game was not entirely crazy in terms of offensive achievements. In fact, towards the end of the first half, the Aggies muffed a punt and Sewanee recovered. Orman Simpkins ran in after the muff punt. He ran in from the 1-yard line, and Sewanee took the lead 5-0. Later in the game, time expiring, Warbler Wilson ran in another touchdown to bring the final score to 10-0. So as I said before, offensively, there wasn't much, not a lot of scoring, very defensive game. And you could probably chalk that up to the Tigers already feeling some fatigue, as well as maybe Texas A&M being a bit better than UT. The Aggie school paper, the Battalion, said after the game, the Sewanee Tigers are unmistakably the champions of the South. This was after 6 Sewanee games. They were undefeated, to be fair, but they still had a whole lot of season left. So did a lot of other teams. But the Battalion just flat out put it out there. They knew. Based on the Aggies' play against Sewanee, based on Sewanee's play, based on Sewanee's play against Texas, it was pretty clear already that this was a special team. But the Tigers still had some obstacles in their way before they could actually claim this Champions of the South crown. The Tigers took a 350-mile overnight train to New Orleans, where they were matched up against Tulane. The train pulled in at around 7 a.m. on November 11th, and the Tulane players, much like UT, personally escorted the Sewanee players to a nearby hotel. The game was set to start at 3:30 that afternoon, but the Sewanee players actually did get about a half hour extra of rest. The game didn't start until 4. The Times-Picayune reported a crowd of 800 showing up for the game, and they were loud the entire time. This was a fan base that loved football, a town that loved games, loved excitement. I mean, this is New Orleans, y'all. This is the home of Mardi Gras and parties, so they got in and they got rowdy. And on top of all of this, it was Tulane's first game of the season. They had to open it against a Sewanee team who was, as I mentioned before, 6-0 and, important to note, unscored on. So it wasn't just that the Sewanee team was winning. They weren't even giving their opponents an inch. This was Tulane's opener, and fans were hopeful for the season. They thought, hey, let's be a giant killer, and they came to the stadium expecting a fun time. Tigers forced a quick punt from Tulane to open the game. Then they put together a long, pounding drive, and as they approached the end zone, Gray appeared to fumble, and Tulane recovered, but the referee ruled that Gray was down, so Sewanee kept the ball. On the very next play, Rex Kilpatrick rumbled 5 yards for the touchdown. Pierce nailed the extra point, and it was Sewanee 6-0. After some back and forth play, turnovers, fumbles, the rest, 10 yards from Gray led to another Tiger touchdown. Pierce was spot on again, and the Tigers increased their lead 12-0, with 8.5 minutes left in the first half. Now, Tulane once again tried to mount an attack, but they were pushed back and forced to punt. They were able to stop the Tigers, but they fumbled on the next drive, and Gray recovered the football. Sewanee put together another powerful drive, utilizing short run plays from Simpkins and Gray, until finally Gray was pushed over the line for a touchdown. Pierce missed the PAT, so the score was now 17-0 with 2.5 minutes left in the first half. Stayed that way till halftime, though let's pause and remember the 15-yard run by Warbler Wilson, of which the Times-Picayune claims 5 yards were, quote, due to a water boy getting in the way when leaving the field, which is the most, early days football statement I've ever read in my life. Football at this time was still very unorganized. in terms of refereeing, in terms of, everything pretty much. So it didn't surprise me in the slightest to read that a water boy had gotten onto the field and interfered with play. It was more of a surprise to me that I hadn't read something about this sooner. Now, the second half started off very rough for Sewanee. Pierce picked up an injury on the opening play, though he stayed in the game. The Tigers also turned over the ball twice, but they were never punished for it. The tide finally turned when Deacon Jones broke off a 30-yard run to the Tulane 5-yard line. Then, Rex Kilpatrick powered his way into the end zone, and an injured Pierce still managed to hit his point after, and Sewanee led 23-0. Game once again went back and forth. Neither team could gain much ground. Punt, turnover, punt. And at the 15-minute mark, the game was called due to darkness, leaving Sewanee as 23-0 winners. November 12th was a free day for the Tigers, so they bought box seats for a play at the Tulane Theater, then toured John Dalton Schaefer's sugar plantation. Schaefer was an alumnus of Sewanee and welcomed the team with pride. Afterwards, they hopped on a train to Baton Rouge for their toughest test since Texas. LSU was coming off an 11-0 win against Ole Miss. The year before, they only played one game, but LSU had beaten Tulane 37-0. This was a really good team. And Sewanee was playing their fourth game in 5 days. They had to have been exhausted. But that really didn't stop them. 2,000 fans showed up at State Field in Baton Rouge, a site that is now occupied by the Louisiana State Capitol building, to watch the Battle of the Tigers. Diddy Seibels opened the scoring in the first half in his usual style, then scored again on Sewanee's next play from scrimmage. Kilpatrick scored again after the halftime whistle to bring the score to 17-0. Kilpatrick would score again in the second half, and Sewanee would put in 2 more touchdowns, though the scores would never be reported. So we have no idea who put those 2 touchdowns in, just that they occurred. Final score was 34-0. Sewanee's streak was alive and well, and they looked absolutely untouchable. Nashville American reported that LSU never even got a first down. Sewanee had already achieved something that many thought unthinkable. Undefeated and unscored on after 8 games, despite very little rest for the last 3. For Tiger fans, the season could already be considered a success. But there were still a few more games to play, and still more of this story to write. Sewanee took their 3rd overnight train in 5 days to get to Memphis, where they would play Ole Miss. The Natchez Democrat reported that several hundreds of people showed up to see if the Rebels could finally end Sewanee's unprecedented run. And let me tell you, they came incredibly close. Diddy Seibels scored the game's first touchdown with only 15 seconds to go in the first half. So for an entire half, neither team could get an inch. This was really uncommon for Sewanee. And you could put it up to fatigue, you could put it up to Ole Miss being really good, but this was much closer than I think any of the Sewanee players would have wanted. Now, Rex Kilpatrick scored the second touchdown of the game in the dying moments of the second half. Final score 12-0. So this was the closest game that Sewanee had all season. Ole Miss came incredibly close to scoring multiple times. They just couldn't get it over the line. But Sewanee was able to hold firm, and they got it done. And with that win, the Tigers had done it. 5 games, 6 days, 5 wins. No one had scored. Sewanee outscored their opponents by an unprecedented, never-to-be-matched score of 91-0 in the span of this road trip. Luke Lee's maniacal plan paid off in a way that even he could never have predicted. Nobody could have predicted it. Except the Sewanee Purple. Remember last episode? The Purple had sounded the horn before the game against Rhodes. And maybe it was just self-confidence that happens. I'm a sports writer. I understand this. You got your team from the college who you go to, and you think they're world beaters. They can beat anybody. Sometimes that works. Usually it doesn't. But for the Sewanee Purple, this worked out like no one could have imagined. 5 games, 6 days, 5 wins, and nobody scored. But the Tigers were not